Welcome back to Slabbed Portfolios, the podcast where we break down the biggest comics, collectibles, and action figures so you can collect smarter and avoid costly mistakes. Please make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on any updates. Today we're talking about one of the biggest comic-related television events coming this year, and honestly, one that could have a serious impact on the Green Lantern market for the foreseeable future, to say the least. HBO's new DC series Lanterns premieres Sunday, August 16th, and there's already a growing sense among collectors that this show could completely reshape interest in several major Green Lantern keys. I know that's at least true for myself, but I'm a Green Lantern fan, so I've got a little bit of bias in this. I'm a DC fan. So to see something like this, to see what James Gunn is doing with the DC Universe, and all of these new great shows and movies are coming out, as far as I'm concerned, is long overdue. But what makes this project interesting is that HBO doesn't appear to be approaching Green Lantern like a traditional superhero show that we've seen in other formats, because everything surrounding the series so far suggests a much more grounded and character-focused approach. Instead of immediately leaning into giant cosmic battles and nonstop CGI, which is what we see in several of these sorts of things, this show seems to be centered around mystery, investigation, and the relationship between Hal Jordan and John Stewart. And honestly, that may be exactly what this franchise needed. It's certainly never been done before, I'll tell you that. Green Lantern has always been a difficult property to adapt because the mythology is so massive. Between the core, the emotional spectrum, the alien worlds, and the different lanterns themselves, it's easy for the concept to become overwhelming. So rather than throwing audiences directly into the deepest parts of the mythology, it looks like HBO is building the world through the characters first, and that's probably a good thing. Hal Jordan is being played by Kyle Chandler, which I think is a really smart casting decision. Chandler tends to bring a believable, grounded energy to his roles, and that matters for a character like Hal Jordan, specifically. Instead of feeling overly polished or cartoonish, this version of Hal feels like it's going to lean more into experience, confidence, and wear and tear from years of being a Lantern. Then you have John Stewart, being played by Aaron Pierre, and this may quietly become one of the biggest comic market storylines attached to the show. Because John Stewart already has a massive built-in fan base from the Justice League animated era, and for a lot of fans, he is the Green Lantern. If HBO delivers a strong performance and makes him the emotional center of the series, demand for John Stewart books could increase very quickly. And that brings us to the comics themselves. Because if this show connects with audiences, there are several books that could see major increases in attention, liquidity, and desirability. The obvious starting point is Showcase 22, the first appearance of Hal Jordan. This is already one of the cornerstone Silver Age DC books, but media attention tends to do something important for books like this. And it's that it reminds the market how historically significant they actually are. When a character becomes culturally relevant again, collectors start prioritizing the major keys tied to that character. And Showcase 22 sits at the very top of that list. What's interesting about Showcase 22 is that it doesn't really behave like a trendy spec book. It never really has. It behaves more like a foundational asset. And if the show does succeed, I think you'll see increased competition specifically for cleaner, higher grade copies, because long-term collectors may become less willing to part with them. Then you move into Green Lantern #1, which I think becomes a really important secondary key if Showcase 22 starts getting too expensive for average collectors. And this is something we see all the time in comic markets. Once the true first appearance becomes financially unreachable, collectors start moving towards issue ones, iconic covers, and earlier Silver Age books tied to the same character. Green Lantern #1 checks a lot of boxes. Historic title issue, strong visual appeal, major Silver Age energy, and direct connection to Hal Jordan. Those books tend to gain momentum naturally once a property starts becoming mainstream again. Another major book that collectors are already paying attention to is Green Lantern #7, the first appearance of Sinestro. And honestly, this book may end up being one of the most important villain keys tied to the entire series, depending on how much focus Sinestro gets in future seasons. Because Sinestro isn't just another DC villain. He's deeply tied into Hal Jordan's story in the emotional core of the Green Lantern mythology. If the show portrays him correctly, then audiences could become very attached to that rivalry. And when viewers emotionally connect with villains, their first appearances often rise significantly in importance. And I'll tell you right now, that book is particularly difficult in high grade. Not a lot of Green Lantern 7s floating around in high grade, I'll tell you that. Now, one book I think people absolutely need to keep an eye on is Green Lantern 87. That's the first appearance of John Stewart. This book already has a strong reputation in the hobby, but what's different now is that John Stewart could finally receive the kind of live action spotlight that transforms a respected comic character into a mainstream cultural character. I mean, we could see a shift here, and that distinction matters a lot. There are comic characters who are beloved within the hobby, and then there are comic characters who break into broader mainstream awareness because of a successful adaptation. If Aaron Pierre's performance lands with audiences the way many people expect it will, then Green Lantern 87 could become one of the most discussed DC keys of this entire media cycle. But there's another Green Lantern book that I think could surprise people if the show succeeds, and that's Green Lantern number 59, the first appearance of Guy Gardner. I love the book. I personally have it in a 9.6. I'm a fan of the character. I'm a fan of the book. I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, when the Superman movie came out, that could have spiked it. It did, but this is a little bit different because now HBO is giving them an entire series. So keep an eye on all this stuff. It's going to be very interesting. Now, Guy Gardner has always been one of the most divisive personalities in Green Lantern history. Some fans love him because of his arrogance, his attitude, his unpredictability. Other fans see him as abrasive or chaotic compared to Hal Jordan or John Stewart. But that personality with Guy is exactly why he works so well in live action when casted correctly. And with Nathan Fillion tied to Guy Gardner in the broader DC universe, which I love that casting, by the way, there's already renewed attention surrounding the character. If audiences continue to respond positively to this version of Guy, then Green Lantern 59 could start getting serious traction, particularly because he's been in other shows already. Now, what makes that book interesting is that it has historically lived below the level of some of the major Hal Jordan and John Stewart keys in terms of mainstream collector attention. But media exposure changes things. Once audiences start connecting with characters emotionally, collectors begin reevaluating books they previously overlooked. And Guy Gardner has the kind of personality that can absolutely steal scenes in a live action environment. If that happens, I could easily see collectors starting to view Green Lantern 59 very differently than they did even a year ago. There are also broader Green Lantern books that people are beginning to discuss more heavily. Sinestro Corpse material, Blackest Night related books, Parallax connected stories, and key Lantern mythology issues are all starting to receive renewed attention because collectors are already speculating about where HBO could take the series if it becomes successful long term. And that's another reason why television adaptations affect comic markets differently than movies do. Movies, as we all know, tend to create short-term spikes. Television shows, especially weekly HBO-style releases, create ongoing conversations. Every episode creates new theories, new discussions, new character moments, and new speculation cycles. That keeps comic books tied to the show in active conversation for months, rather than just a single opening weekend. Now, I do think collectors should remain careful about chasing pure hype blindly, and I'm not suggesting that you do that. I'm just saying keep an eye on this stuff, because Green Lantern has had media hype before. And longtime comic fans still remember the disappointment surrounding previous live action attempts. So there's always risk attached to assuming a show will automatically succeed. But what feels different this time is the tone and the approach. HBO appears to be treating Lanterns less like a loud superhero spectacle and more like a serious prestige series built around relationships, mystery, and character development. And honestly, that slower, more grounded approach may end up creating much stronger long-term interest in the comics themselves. Because when audiences truly connect with characters emotionally, the collectibles tied to those characters often become more desirable in a lasting way rather than just temporary speculation pieces. And personally, I think one of the most important things to watch after the show premieres won't even be prices immediately. It'll be availability. If Green Lantern 87 starts disappearing from the market, that matters. If high grade copies of Showcase 22 become harder to locate publicly and have record sales, that matters. If Green Lantern 59 suddenly starts getting more auction activity because of renewed Guy Gardner interest, that matters too. In comic collecting, scarcity movement often tells the real story before price guides catch up. And if Lanterns becomes the prestige HBO series that DC hopes it can be, that James Gunn hopes it can be, that I hope it can be as a fan, we may look back at this moment as the point where Green Lantern comics truly re entered the mainstream collector spotlight in a major, major way. I hope the information in this episode continues to help you. Thanks for listening to the Slabbed Portfolios podcast, and I will see you guys on the next one.